On a quiet Sunday morning, the peaceful neighborhood of Los Alamos was shaken by the loud sound of police sirens. What dark secret was hidden behind the lace curtains and manicured gardens? How could such a close-knit community harbor such a heinous crime? This is a story of how love, betrayal, and greed intertwined to create a perfect storm of deception and death. It all started with a gasp and the dull sound of a blunt object hitting flesh and bone. In the basement of the Martinez home, a pool of blood slowly spread across the concrete floor. Elena Martinez, the beloved preschool teacher and devoted wife, lay motionless, her eyes open in an expression of shock and horror. Next to his body, a red-stained baseball bat silently told the story of his last moments. The neighbors, still in their pajamas, looked out their windows to witness a scene that would change their lives forever. In front of the Martinez home, a dozen patrol cars surrounded the property while officers cordoned off the area with yellow tape. The news spread like wildfire. Elena Martinez had been brutally murdered in her own home. But who could wish the death of such a beloved woman? Elena was known for her warm smile and willingness to help everyone. Her students adored her, parents respected her, and her neighbors considered her the heart of the community. However, beneath the surface of this perfect image, there were dark secrets that were about to come to light. Detective Javier Soto, a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for solving the most difficult cases, was assigned to the investigation. From the moment he set foot on the crime scene, his instinct told him that this was not a simple robbery gone wrong, as initially thought. Soto carefully observed the behavior of Ricardo Martinez, Elena's husband. As neighbors cried and comforted each other, Ricardo seemed distant, more concerned about his cell phone than the tragic loss of his wife. This attitude raised immediate suspicions in Soto, who decided to delve into the couple's private life. As the detective began to dig, he discovered a web of lies and deception that extended far further than anyone could have imagined. Ricardo Martinez, the successful corporate lawyer with a charming smile and an impeccable suit, led a double life that would have scandalized his neighbors if they had known about it. Deleted text messages, calls at odd hours, and suspicious bank transfers painted a picture of a man with a lot to hide. But the real bomb exploded when Soto received an anonymous call. A trembling voice revealed to him that he had seen Ricardo in an affectionate attitude with a young woman in a nearby park days before the murder. The young woman's description matched that of Lucia Gomez, the 18-year-old daughter of the next-door neighbors. Lucia, with her golden hair and green eyes, was the image of youthful innocence. But could this apparent naivety hide a heart capable of participating in such a heinous crime? Intrigued by this new information, Soto began investigating Lucia. He discovered that the young woman had been absent from school in the days after the murder, and that her behavior had changed drastically in recent weeks. Her worried parents mentioned that Lucia had been distant and mysterious. Meanwhile, the community of Los Alamos was plunged into collective mourning. Elena's students left flowers and drawings in front of her house, and neighbors organized vigils in her memory. No one could believe that someone would want to harm such a kind woman. However, beneath this layer of pain and shock, rumors and speculation were beginning to emerge. Had Elena discovered something she shouldn't have? Was it possible that her own goodness had led to her downfall? These questions began to circulate in whispers among neighbors, fueling an atmosphere of mistrust and paranoia. As Soto delved deeper into the investigation, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Ricardo and Lucia had been having a clandestine romance for months. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Elena had discovered her husband's infidelity with her neighbor's teenage daughter. But the story was even more complicated than it seemed at first glance. Soto discovered that Lucia was not the naive victim that everyone believed. The young woman, apparently sweet and innocent, had been an active participant in the affair, seduced not only by Ricardo's charms, but also by the promise of a life of luxury and excitement that the lawyer had painted for her. The night of the crime, Elena confronted Ricardo with evidence of their affair. She had found compromising messages on her husband's phone and, in a fit of rage, threatened to expose him publicly. For Ricardo, whose career and reputation were everything, this threat was unacceptable. In a fit of rage and desperation, Ricardo took his son's baseball bat and repeatedly beat Elena to death. The basement, which had once been the place where the family held happy memories, became the scene of a brutal crime. But the most shocking twist was yet to come. While Soto was preparing the arrest warrant for Ricardo, he received another anonymous call. This time, the voice on the other end of the line belonged to Lucia. Between sobs, the young woman confessed that she had been an accomplice to the murder. The truth was even more twisted than anyone could imagine. Lucia, manipulated by Ricardo, had helped plan Elena's murder. The lawyer had promised her a life together, full of luxury and travel, if she helped him get rid of his wife. Lucia's naivety and infatuation led her to participate in this horrible crime. The night of the murder, Lucia had distracted Elena with a surprise visit, allowing Ricardo to prepare for the attack. While the teacher chatted kindly with the young woman in the kitchen, without suspecting that it would be the last conversation of her life, Ricardo waited in the basement with the bat in his hand. When Elena went down to the basement, alerted by a strange noise, she came face to face with her husband's betrayal and the complicity of the one she considered almost a daughter. Elena's last moments were filled with confusion and pain, not only physical but also emotional, as she realized the magnitude of the betrayal.
But the web of deception did not end there. The final revelation came when Soto discovered that Ricardo had planned to get rid of Lucia as well. The lawyer had hired a hitman to eliminate the young woman once the dust of Elena's murder had settled. His plan was to collect on his wife's life insurance and disappear, leaving behind a trail of death and deceit. Lucia, upon learning of this plan, realized that she had been just a pawn in Ricardo's twisted game. The young woman, consumed by guilt and fear, decided to confess everything to the police, hoping to obtain some kind of leniency. The arrest of Ricardo and Lucia shocked the Los Alamos community. Neighbors, who had once lived in mutual trust, now looked askance at the closed doors of nearby houses, wondering what other secrets might be hidden behind the perfect facades of their homes. The trial that followed captured national attention. The prosecutor in the case, an experienced man named Carlos Vega, presented a strong case against Ricardo and Lucia. The evidence was overwhelming. The baseball bat with Ricardo and Elena's DNA, the incriminating text messages, the suspicious bank transfers, and, most damning of all, Lucia's confession. During the trial, more details about the relationship between Ricardo and Lucia came to light. It was revealed that the lawyer had been manipulating the young woman for months, taking advantage of her vulnerability and her dreams of escaping a life she considered boring and limited. Ricardo had presented himself as her ticket to a life of excitement and luxury, promising her trips around the world and a glamorous existence. Lucia's parents, devastated by their daughter's participation in such a heinous crime, testified about the changes they had noticed in her in the months before the murder. They talked about how their daughter, once cheerful and open, had become reserved and distant. Now they understood that these changes coincided with the beginning of their relationship with Ricardo. The most shocking testimony came from Lucia herself. With tears in her eyes, the young woman described how Ricardo had seduced her with promises of love and a dream life. She talked about how, little by little, the lawyer had convinced her that Elena was an obstacle to her happiness, manipulating her to the point of making her an accessory to murder. Ricardo, for his part, maintained a cold facade throughout the trial. He denied all the accusations, trying to paint Lucia as an obsessed young woman who had made up the whole story. However, his performance did not convince the jury, who were able to see through his superficial charisma and recognize the monster hidden behind. As the trial progressed, the Los Alamos community became divided. Some felt compassion for Lucia, seeing her as another victim of Ricardo's manipulation. Others considered her equally guilty, arguing that, at 18, she should have known how to distinguish between good and evil. The verdict came after 3 weeks of trial. Ricardo was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lucia, given her age and the fact that she had cooperated with the investigation, received a lesser but significant sentence, 20 years in prison. The sentence sparked mixed reactions in the community. Some felt that justice had been done, while others argued that Lucia should have received a harsher sentence. The young woman's parents, devastated, wondered where they had failed and how they had not been able to protect their daughter from Ricardo's toxic influence. The case left deep scars on the Los Alamos community. What was once a quiet, close-knit neighborhood was now steeped in mistrust and paranoia. Neighbors, who once left their doors open and happily shared keys to their homes, now installed security systems and looked askance at strangers. The school where Elena had taught became a silent monument to her memory. Her colleagues and students struggled to reconcile the image of the kind and caring teacher with the victim of such a brutal crime. A scholarship was established in his name for students who wanted to pursue a career in education, a small ray of light in the midst of so much darkness. Lucia's parents, unable to bear the whispers and accusatory looks of their neighbors, finally moved out, leaving behind the house where they had raised their daughter and the happy memories that were now tinged with tragedy. His departure was yet another reminder of how a single act of violence can have repercussions that extend far beyond the immediate victims. Detective Javier Soto, deeply affected by the case, decided to dedicate the rest of his career to unmasking crimes of passion and protecting vulnerable young people from the manipulation of predatory adults. The case of Elena, Ricardo, and Lucia became a case study at the police academy, an example of how lust, greed, and betrayal can intertwine to create a perfect storm of violence and deceit. Years after the trial, a local journalist decided to write a book about the case. During his investigation, he interviewed Lucia in prison. The young woman, now in her 20s, had changed drastically. Time behind bars had eroded her youthful beauty, replacing it with a toughness that spoke of years of regret and reflection. Lucia spoke with the journalist about the weight of guilt she carried every day. He described how, in his darkest moments, he could see Elena's face, her eyes full of betrayal and pain in the last moments of her life. She talked about how she had spent countless nights awake, going over every decision that had led her to that point, desperately wishing she could go back in time and do things differently. The journalist's book became a bestseller, reviving national interest in the case. Many saw it as a warning about the dangers of manipulation and the importance of recognizing the signs of abuse in relationships. Others criticized him for what they perceived as excessive sympathy toward Lucia, arguing that the book minimized her role in the crime. Meanwhile, in his state prison cell, Ricardo Martinez maintained his innocence. He had appealed his conviction several times, without success. His former colleagues at the law firm, who had once considered him a rising star, now avoided mentioning his name. His fall from grace was complete. As the years passed, the Martinez case became an urban legend in Los Alamos. The new residents heard distorted versions of the story, each one more sensational than the last. The house where the crime occurred remained empty for a long time, with estate agents struggling to sell it due to its dark history.
The impact of the case extended beyond Los Alamos. It became a reference point in discussions about domestic violence, psychological manipulation, and the dangers of inappropriate relationships between adults and adolescents. Advocacy groups used Elena and Lucia's story to advocate for greater awareness and better support systems for victims of abuse. In prison, Lucia became an example of rehabilitation. He completed his high school education and began taking college correspondence courses. She became involved in mentoring programs for at-risk youth, sharing her story as a warning about the consequences of bad decisions and the importance of seeking help when a relationship becomes toxic. Ricardo, on the other hand, sank deeper into denial and bitterness. He refused to participate in rehabilitation programs, maintaining that he was the victim of a conspiracy. Their appeals became increasingly desperate and less convincing, until finally the courts refused to hear any further. 10 years after the crime, Detective Soto, now close to retirement, received an unexpected letter. It was from Lucia, who was about to be eligible for parole. In the letter, Lucia expressed her deep remorse and thanked Soto for having discovered the truth. She told him about her work in the prison and her desire to use her experience to help others once she was released. Soto was moved by the letter. Although he could never fully forgive Lucia for her role in Elena's death, he saw in her words an opportunity for redemption. He decided to support her request for parole, believing that Lucia could do more good in the outside world than behind bars. Lucia's parole hearing was another tense moment for the Los Alamos community. Some argued vehemently against his release, maintaining that 10 years were not enough to pay for his crime. Others, including some of Lucia's former teachers and Detective Soto himself, spoke in her favor, highlighting her progress and her potential to contribute positively to society. Finally, the parole board made its decision. Lucia would be released, but under strict conditions. He would have to wear an electronic monitor, attend regular therapy, and continue his work with at-risk youth. He was also prohibited from returning to Los Alamos or contacting Elena's family. The day of Lucia's release was bittersweet. Her parents, who had maintained a strained but consistent relationship with her during her incarceration, were there to greet her. The media was also present, eager to capture images of the woman who had once been the teenager at the center of one of the region's most notorious crimes. Lucia emerged from prison a changed woman. She was no longer the naive and manipulative teenager she had entered a decade earlier. His face showed the lines of regret and determination. In a brief statement to the press, he expressed remorse for his actions and his commitment to honor Elena's memory by helping others avoid the path she had taken. Meanwhile, in Los Alamos, life had moved on, but the scars of crime remained. The school where Elena had taught now had a memorial garden in her honor, a quiet place where students and teachers could reflect on the lasting impact of a life well lived. The neighbors who had known Elena, Ricardo and Lucia, had aged, but the memory of the crime was still fresh in their minds. Many had developed a new appreciation for the importance of watching for signs of trouble in the lives of their neighbors and loved ones. The case had forever changed the way the community saw itself. What was once seen as a safe and peaceful haven was now recognized as a place as vulnerable to tragedy as any other. This realization had led to a greater sense of vigilance, but also a deeper commitment to mutual care. 20 years after the crime, the journalist who had written the book about the case decided to follow up. She interviewed Lucia, who was now working as a counselor for victims of domestic abuse. She spoke candidly about her past, her daily struggle with guilt, and her determination to use her experience to make a positive difference. The journalist also visited Ricardo in prison. The once charismatic lawyer was now a shadow of his former self. Years of denial and bitterness had taken their toll. Although he continued to maintain his innocence, his words lacked the conviction they once held. The most impactful interview was with Elena and Ricardo's daughter, now an adult woman. She spoke about growing up in the shadow of her father's crime and the loss of her mother. He described how he had struggled with anger and confusion for years, before finally finding the strength to forge his own path in life. She was now a teacher, like her mother, dedicated to making a positive difference in the lives of young people. The journalist's new book offered a thoughtful perspective on the long-term consequences of crime. It explored how a single act of violence can have repercussions that span decades, affecting not only those directly involved but entire communities. The case of Elena, Ricardo, and Lucia had become more than a simple story of crime and punishment. It was a powerful reminder of the fragility of trust, the complexity of human relationships, and the lasting power of the decisions we make. In Los Alamos, life had moved on. New families had moved in. New children played in the parks where Elena had once taken her students. But in the hearts and minds of those who had lived through those tragic events, the memory lingered. The story of Elena, Ricardo, and Lucia had become an integral part of the community's identity. It was a scar that had healed, but would never completely disappear. It served as a constant reminder that even in the most peaceful and seemingly perfect places, human passions can lead to devastating consequences. And so, life in Los Alamos continued. Older residents told the story to new ones, a warning and a lesson wrapped into one. The children grew up hearing whispers about the house where the crime occurred, now occupied by a new family who had decided to give it a chance despite its history. The legacy of the case extended far beyond the boundaries of Los Alamos. It had inspired changes in laws, improvements in abuse prevention programs, and greater awareness of the complexity of human relationships. Elena's tragedy, Ricardo's fall, and Lucia's redemption had been woven into the fabric of society, an enduring reminder of the consequences of our actions and the power of redemption. Okay, I'm going to extend the story to reach the character goal. I'll pick up where we left off, delving into the long-term consequences and impact on the community. As the sun set over Los Alamos, bathing suburban homes in golden light, the community rested in uneasy peace. The tragedy that had once shaken their foundations was now part of their history, a shadow that had faded but would never completely disappear. And in that persistence, in that collective memory, perhaps lay the most important lesson of all, that the true strength of a community is not measured by its ability to avoid tragedy, but by its resilience to overcome it and grow from it. Over the years, Los Alamos had transformed. The crime that had once defined the neighborhood was now just one part of its complex history. New generations grew up hearing the story as an urban legend, a cautionary tale that parents share with their children to teach them about the dangers of the world and the importance of honesty and integrity. The Martinez home, which for so long had stood as a silent reminder of the tragedy, finally found new owners. A young couple, aware of the history of the property, decided to buy it with the intention of transforming it into a symbol of renewal and hope. They completely renovated the house, planted a beautiful garden in the front, and hosted a welcome party for the entire neighborhood. This act of bravery and optimism was seen by many as an important step in the community's healing process. Detective Soto, now retired, often reflected on the case that had defined his career. He had corresponded on and off with Lucia over the years, following her progress and efforts to redeem herself. Although she could never fully forgive her actions, Soto found some comfort in seeing how Lucia had transformed her life and was working hard to help others avoid falling into similar situations. Elena and Ricardo's daughter, Maria, had become an important voice in the community. After years of therapy and self-reflection, he decided to use his experience to help others. She founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting children of victims of domestic violence and educating young people about the signs of abusive relationships. Her work was recognized nationally, and she was invited to give talks at schools and universities across the country. The impact of the case extended far beyond Los Alamos. It became a case study in law schools and criminology programs. Students analyzed the details of the crime, the psychological complexities of those involved, and the legal and social ramifications. The Martinez case, as it was known in academic circles, sparked debates about the nature of guilt, the effectiveness of the criminal justice system, and the challenges of rehabilitation. On the 25th anniversary of the crime, the Los Alamos City Council decided to commemorate the occasion in a unique way. Instead of focusing on the tragedy, they chose to celebrate the resilience and spirit of the community. They organized a week-long festival titled Week of Renewal and Hope. The event included workshops on domestic violence prevention, seminars on mental health and community well-being, and activities that fostered neighborhood unity. During this festival, a new community park was dedicated on the land where the school where Elena taught had once stood. The park, named the Garden of Memory and Hope, featured a beautiful mural depicting the history of Los Alamos, including its darkest moments and subsequent rebirth. In the center of the park, a fountain of crystal-clear water symbolized purification and new beginnings. The park's opening attracted national media attention. Journalists from across the country came to Los Alamos to cover the event and reflect on how a community can recover from such a shocking tragedy. Among the guests of honor was Lucia, whose presence generated mixed reactions among the residents. Lucia, now in her 40s, arrived at the event apprehensive but determined to confront her past. His emotional and sincere speech moved many of those present. She spoke about the weight of guilt she had carried for decades, her struggle to redeem herself, and her unwavering commitment to helping others avoid the mistakes she had made. Although some residents remained skeptical, many saw their presence as an important step in the process of collective healing. Elena and Ricardo's daughter, Maria, also spoke at the event. Her speech focused on forgiveness and the importance of breaking cycles of violence and abuse. He shared how he had struggled for years with anger and resentment, but had finally found peace by dedicating his life to helping others. His message of hope and resilience resonated deeply with the community. The festival also served as a platform to launch new community initiatives. A scholarship fund was established in Elena's memory for students who wanted to pursue careers in education or social work. A mentoring program was created for at-risk youth, inspired in part by Lucia's story. And a community resource center was launched offering counseling services, legal support, and education on healthy relationships. As the festival drew to a close, Los Alamos residents reflected on how they had changed over the past 25 years. The tragedy that had once divided them had now become a catalyst for positive change and unity. Although the scars remained, the community had learned to grow through the pain and use their experience to help others. The impact of the Martinez case continued to reverberate beyond Los Alamos. It inspired changes to domestic violence laws in several states, leading to greater protections for victims and harsher penalties for perpetrators. The book written about the case became required reading in many social work and psychology programs. Used as a powerful tool to teach about the complexities of abusive relationships and the importance of early intervention. In the prison system, Lucia's story became an example of successful rehabilitation. Their mentoring program for at-risk youth expanded to other prisons in the state, offering hope and guidance to those struggling to find a path to redemption. Ricardo, for his part, remained in prison, his final appeal rejected by the state Supreme Court. As the years passed, his health deteriorated and he became increasingly withdrawn. The few visitors he received reported that he spent most of his time reading and writing in a personal diary. Although he never publicly admitted his guilt, prison guards noticed a change in his behavior in recent years, describing him as more thoughtful and less combative. The story of Los Alamos became a symbol of how a community can transform tragedy into catalysis for positive change. Delegations from other cities that had experienced shocking crimes began visiting Los Alamos, seeking to learn from their experience and replicate their model of community recovery and renewal. On the 30th anniversary of the crime, a documentary titled Los Alamos, From Pain to Hope, premiered at a major film festival. The film explored not only the events of the crime, but also the long and complex process of healing the community. He interviewed residents old and new, exploring how the tragedy had shaped the neighborhood's identity and how new generations were carrying forward the legacy of resilience and compassion. The documentary also addressed the lives of those most directly affected by the crime. Maria, Elena, and Ricardo's daughter had expanded her nonprofit organization nationally, becoming a leading voice in domestic violence prevention. Lucia continued her work with at-risk youth, although her health was beginning to decline due to years of stress and regret. Detective Soto, in his later years, decided to write his memoirs, focusing on the Martinez case and how it had changed his perspective on justice and rehabilitation. His book offered an intimate look at the investigation process and the personal struggles he faced during and after the case. As Los Alamos approached the 40th anniversary of the crime, the community was at a turning point. Most of the residents who had directly experienced the events were gone, replaced by new families who knew the story primarily through stories and commemorations. This posed new challenges. How to keep Elena's memory and the lessons learned alive without becoming trapped in the past. The answer came in the form of an ambitious community project. The residents decided to create an interactive educational center that would not only tell the story of the crime and its consequences, but also serve as a space for ongoing dialogue about topics such as domestic violence, mental health, and the importance of community connections. The center, located in a renovated building in the heart of Los Alamos, quickly became a landmark for the community and visitors alike. It featured multimedia exhibits that told the story of the crime and the subsequent transformation of the community. It also offered spaces for workshops, support groups, and educational programs. One of the most striking exhibits was a virtual reality room that allowed visitors to experience Los Alamos at different points in its history, before the crime, immediately after, and in the present. This immersive experience helped new generations understand the profound impact that crime had had on the community and how they had managed to overcome it. As Los Alamos approached half a century since that fateful day, the community had accomplished something extraordinary. They had transformed a tragedy into a catalyst for positive change, not only in their own neighborhood but in communities across the country. The story of Elena, Ricardo, and Lucia was no longer just a tale of crime and punishment, but a testament to the power of human resilience and the ability of a community to heal and grow through adversity. The legacy of the Martinez case continued to evolve, adapting to new challenges and social realities. Programs inspired by the tragedy continued to help countless people, saving lives and relationships. And in Los Alamos, each new dawn brought with it the promise of a future built on the foundation of the lessons learned in the past. The story of Los Alamos had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is the possibility of redemption and renewal. And as the sun set over the suburban homes, bathing them in golden light, the residents of Los Alamos could look back with a mixture of sadness and pride, knowing that they had transformed their pain into a lasting legacy of compassion, vigilance, and unity.